Good morning. Today we are here in New York to announce a historic arrest across a wide-sweeping criminal enterprise that envelops both the NBA and La Cosa Nostra.
Okay, so Kash Patel's words completely just sent Las Vegas into absolute madness last night. You will not believe what went down.
Individuals such as Chauncey Billups, Damon Jones, and Terry Rozier were taken into custody today.
Now, it gets even wilder than just those big names. Imagine this. Over 200 players were actually busted in a massive gambling scandal that's directly tied to organized crime. But here's the kicker. What federal investigators found inside that casino, it could completely destroy reputations and literally shake the NBA to its core. The entire sports world felt the shock when this whole mess exploded on October 23, 2025, with authorities coordinating arrests across an astonishing 11 states. Seriously, we're talking federal indictments unsealed that day, involving not just one, but multiple high-profile NBA figures. This includes a current head coach, an active player, and even former NBA personalities, all of them caught up in what law enforcement is now calling one of the most brazen sports corruption schemes we've seen since online betting became widely legalized. Wild, right?
The charges and the arrests that were taken down across this country range from wire fraud, money laundering, extortion, robbery, illegal gambling.
Okay, but before we dive deep into every single nitty-gritty detail, before we expose exactly who got arrested, what they're accused of, and just how far this rabbit hole actually stretches, let me hit you with something right up front. You've probably seen those crazy sensational headlines all over social media, right? The ones claiming over 200 NBA players were somehow rounded up at some wild Las Vegas party. Let's be crystal clear here, that is 100% fake news, pure misinformation. Plain and simple, it's false. The real number of arrests is still massive, don't get me wrong. We're talking 30 individuals taken into custody, but it's definitely not 200 players. In fact, only 3 prominent NBA figures were actually arrested: Portland Trail Blazers head coach Chauncey Billups, Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier, and former NBA player Damon Jones. So while there wasn't this massive party raid with hundreds of players getting busted, here's what was happening. These incredibly secretive, underground high-stakes poker games. These were exclusive, celebrity-lured gatherings taking place in super swanky spots like Manhattan, Miami, Las Vegas, and even the Hamptons. Forget your typical friendly house party poker night. No, these were meticulously planned, elaborate operations, custom designed to scam wealthy victims out of millions of dollars. And how did they do it? With mind-blowing high-tech cheating methods like X-ray tables, marked cards only visible with special contact lenses, hidden cameras feeding real-time info to accomplices, and even rigged shuffling machine. Federal authorities say these crooked poker games have been running since at least 2019, defrauding victims of a staggering $7 million. But here's the really insane part. Investigators believe that number could be way higher.
One victim in particular lost $1.8 million. In total, losses exceeded $7 million and continue to climb.
I mean, can you even begin to imagine one single night, one poker game, and suddenly you're down almost $2 million. But here's the really sinister part. If you even tried to back out, if you spotted something fishy and tried to just walk away without paying up, you'd be met with serious threats and intimidation. Why? Because these games weren't just some casual setup. They were backed by La Cosa Nostra. Yeah, Italian organized crime families who definitely don't take kindly to people skipping out on their debts. And that's exactly where the second, even darker part of this story kicks in. The part that directly involves the manipulation of actual NBA games and the betting markets themselves. This is called Operation Nothing But Bet, the other major federal investigation that was announced right alongside Operation Royal Flush. And trust me, my friends, this one gets even more disturbing when you consider the integrity of sports.
One involves sports betting, and the other involves illegal gambling, very specifically rigged poker games. The first indictment involves 6 defendants who are alleged to have participated in one of the most brazen sports corruption since online sports betting became widely legalized in the United States. This scheme is an insider sports betting conspiracy that exploited confidential information about National Basketball Association athletes and teams.
Donaghey's warning that this is just the tip of the iceberg is incredibly ominous. He knows firsthand how these investigations unfold, and he's predicting that once these defendants start cooperating with the FBI to cut down their sentences, they're going to spill a whole lot more names. Seriously, the web of corruption could spread much, much wider than what we're seeing right now. This is the absolutely terrifying reality of how organized crime operates in sports. They're not just looking for a quick score. No, they're aiming to build long-term relationships where they can control the athlete, extracting value season after season. Now let's pivot to Operation Nothing But Bet, the insider betting scheme. While those poker games were all glitzy and movie-like, this operation in many ways was far more insidious because it directly attacked the very integrity of NBA games themselves. This scheme ran from December 2022 to March 2024, and it involved a network of individuals who had access to confidential NBA information, stuff that wasn't available to the public or even legal sportsbook. They would then use this secret intel to place bets with a massive unfair advantage, essentially pulling off the sports betting equivalent of insider trading. Let's break down some of the specific games and incidents mentioned in the indictment, because the details really paint a clear picture of how this worked in practice. On February 9, 2023, the Los Angeles Lakers played the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, this was a nationally televised game, a huge matchup that tons of people were betting on. But what the general public didn't know at the time was that LeBron James was going to sit out due to injury. This information was strictly confidential, known only to people within the Lakers organization. But Damon Jones, who was working as an unofficial assistant coach with the Lakers, allegedly leaked this information to his co-conspirator. They then placed bets on the game, knowing one of the best players in the world wouldn't be playing, giving them a monumental edge. By the time the injury report became public and the betting lines adjusted, they had already locked in their bets at wildly favorable odds. And then there's the March 20, 2023 game between the Charlotte Hornets and the New Orleans Pelicans. As I mentioned earlier, Terry Rozier allegedly orchestrated a scheme where he would exit the game early after playing only 9 minutes. His co-conspirators, especially his childhood friend De Niro Laster, who went by nicknames like Nero, Hisso, or Pisso, placed heavy bets on the under for Rozier's prop bets. You know, whether a player scores over or under a certain number of points, grabs, rebounds, assists, all that stuff. With Rozier playing only 9 minutes, there was absolutely no way he was going to hit the over on any of his props, making those under bets essentially guaranteed winners. The indictment also points to a March 2023 game between the Portland Trail Blazers and the Chicago Bulls, where Chauncey Billups allegedly leaked information about Trail Blazers players missing the game or even tanking it. Again, this gave his co-conspirators vital insider information they could exploit in the betting markets. Now, something super important to grasp here is the role of Jontay Porter in all of this. Porter isn't one of the 34 people arrested on October 23, 2025, but he is absolutely connected to this scandal. Porter, who played for the Toronto Raptors, was banned from the NBA for life earlier in 2024 after the league discovered he had shared confidential information, manipulated his own performances for prop bets, and actually placed bets on NBA games himself, which is a massive no-no under NBA rule. Porter later pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud conspiracy charges, and in his guilty plea he revealed how he'd gotten into huge gambling debt and was being pressured by individuals connected to organized crime to cooperate with the betting scheme. The threats apparently got so bad that he genuinely feared for his own safety and the safety of his family. While Porter's direct involvement in the schemes charged in these October 2025 indictments is as an unindicted co-conspirator, his case is clearly part of the same broader investigation. What this tells us is that the FBI and other federal agencies have been painstakingly working on this case for a long time, methodically building their evidence, identifying all the players involved, and connecting the dots between these different schemes. Porter's cooperation with investigators likely provided invaluable information that helped lead to these latest arrests. So let's really dig deep into how these schemes actually operated. And now we have to talk about the fallout, both for the individuals caught up in this mess and for the NBA as a whole.
You know, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. I think when you talk about arrests being made by the FBI, I think the guys that are arrested are going to sit down and, be scared to death with what they're facing, and they're going to start to cooperate, and they're going to tell the FBI everything they know, and this thing is going to spread like wildfire, and you're going to find out that this is a lot bigger than it is right now. And
Now, this is a really important perspective to consider. While it certainly doesn't excuse the behavior, it does help us understand how someone earning $26 million a year, like Terry Rozier, could possibly risk absolutely everything for what to them might seem like relatively small payouts. The truth is, gambling addiction is incredibly real, it's powerfully insidious, and it can force people to make catastrophically poor decisions, completely regardless of their financial status. And get this, think about the wider implications. If referees are implicated in gambling schemes, whether they're betting on games themselves or manipulating calls to help bettors, that would be an absolute disaster for the NBA. We've actually seen this happen once before with Tim Donaghy, who from 2003 to 2007 bet on games he officiated and shared insider information with gamblers. That scandal completely rocked the NBA, leading to major reforms in how referees are monitored. But if it turns out there are even more corrupt referees, if this problem is more widespread, that could utterly shatter fan confidence in the league. However, perhaps the most explosive commentary on this whole scandal has come from none other than Stephen A. Smith, who actually drew direct connections between the timing of these arrests and the current political administration.
Guys, you feel free to weigh in now, Shek. You've heard from Shams, you saw the FBI director speaking about this. What do you think?
I know everybody that's at play, and I don't like to sit up here and be hypocritical about certain things. I homeboy gamble, Ernie. Bet it. We've been on teams. We played cards. We played spades. We played tonk. But with that being said,
and Stephen A. didn't hold back there. He went on to make a really bold prediction about what he thinks is coming next. His reasoning? It's rooted in all the protests and political statements we've seen from various athletes and leagues, and his belief that the current administration is now using federal law enforcement to send powerful messages and exert control. Now, whether you agree with Stephen A.'s political analysis or not, his crucial point about how absolutely unprecedented it is to have the FBI director himself hold a press conference about sports gambling is definitely something worth thinking about.
We know what world that I live in terms of politics. How many times, for one incident after another, have I said, Trump is coming. He's coming. I'm going to say it on national television again.
So, whether you see Stephen A.'s political analysis as brilliant or totally out there, one thing is undeniably true. This scandal has become deeply intertwined with massive questions about power, accountability, and the intense relationship between sports, gambling, and government enforcement. For the NBA itself, the hurdles ahead are simply immense. Commissioner Adam Silver and the league office are now navigating incredibly treacherous waters. On one hand, they've built these incredibly lucrative partnerships with gambling companies, bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. But on the other hand, the very integrity of their product, the games themselves, is being questioned in the most serious way possible. Look, the league has made some changes in response to past scandals. They banned under-prop bets on two-way contract players after the Jonte Porter situation. They've amped up monitoring and surveillance of betting patterns, and they've beefed up their education programs for players and personnel about the risks of gambling. But clearly, those measures haven't been nearly enough. The fact that a current head coach, an active all-star caliber player, and multiple other individuals could participate in these schemes for years before getting caught suggests there are deep systemic vulnerabilities that absolutely need to be addressed. This scandal is a tragedy on so many levels, and let me tell you, it's far from over. As we wait for all the legal proceedings, the arraignments, the trials, the potential plea deals, the cooperation agreements, we can expect even more shocking revelations to emerge. More names will likely be implicated, and more details about the true scope and scale of these operations are going to come to light. The burning question everyone in the sports world is asking right now is, how deep does this actually go? We know about Billups, Rozier, and Jones. We know about the 34 arrests. But if this truly is just the tip of the iceberg, as the FBI and Tim Donaghy have both suggested, then who else is involved? Are there more star players? More coaches? Are referees compromised? What about league officials? People in the media who have inside access? And perhaps most importantly, can the NBA even survive this? Can fans continue to trust that what they're watching is legitimate competition and not some elaborate performance designed purely to hit betting lines? Can the league maintain its massive gambling partnerships with a good conscience? Knowing the vulnerabilities they create, can the sport truly recover from what could easily be the biggest integrity scandal in its entire history? Only time will tell, but one thing is absolutely certain: the NBA, professional sports in general, and the entire sports gambling industry have been fundamentally changed forever by the events of October. This is a watershed moment, a clear before and after dividing line in the history of the sport. For those of us who live and breathe basketball, who grew up watching these players and coaches, who've invested so much of ourselves into following the league, this is a painful reckoning. We have to grapple with the truly disturbing possibility that some of the games we watched, some of the moments we celebrated, some of the outcomes we analyzed and debated, they might not have been real. They might have been fixed, manipulated, rigged from the very start. And as fans, we have to make a tough decision. Can we move past this? Can we rebuild that trust? Or has something fundamental been shattered that can never quite be repaired? Share your thoughts below and we'll be right here to cover every single development, every twist, every turn. So make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell, because you definitely don't want to miss what happens next. When October 23rd hit, the basketball world woke up in total disbelief as news broke that Chauncey Billups was allegedly caught up in a mafia-linked gambling scandal. And when Shaq was asked to react, he said this:
I'm watching a press conference with the director of the FBI. Tell me when we've seen that. We've seen people, we've seen accusations before. We've seen athletes get in trouble with the law before. You don't see the director of the FBI having a press conference. It's not coincidental. It's not an accident. It's a statement.
And what Shaq said, that probably means one crucial thing. He knew. Also in this video, I'll show you the real details, because despite all the rumors, that new footage of NBA players begging Chauncey Billups not to leak their names you might have heard about, it simply doesn't exist, and we'll break down the truth. But first, let's talk about the shockwave that hit the league. The entire basketball world woke up to absolute chaos on October 23rd, 2025, a day that will forever be etched in NBA history as one of the darkest moments the league has ever witnessed. As fans across the nation were getting ready to celebrate the tip-off of a new season, federal authorities were secretly orchestrating what can only be described as a seismic takedown, a takedown that would send shockwaves reverberating through every corner of professional basketball and beyond. This wasn't just another sad story about athletes making poor decisions. Oh no, this was something far more sinister, far more calculated, and frankly far more devastating than anyone could have possibly imagined. The headlines exploded everywhere. Every sports network, every social media platform, every single news outlet in America was screaming Portland Trail Blazers coach Chauncey Billups and Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier had been arrested by the FBI. But this wasn't just some simple arrest. You have to understand, this was the culmination of a multi-year federal investigation that would expose an underground network so elaborate, so technologically sophisticated, and so deeply connected to organized crime that it would make a Hollywood script seem tame by comparison.
I know everybody that's at play, and I don't like to sit up here and be hypocritical about certain things.
When FBI Director Kash Patel himself literally stepped up to the podium, flanked by multiple federal agencies. We're talking the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, the NYPD, Homeland Security Investigations, and even the Waterfront Commission. Everyone knew this was absolutely unprecedented. The FBI Director's presence at a press conference is reserved for only the most significant cases, and as he started to speak, the full terrifying magnitude of what they'd uncovered became crystal clear. The investigation didn't just reveal what two massive criminal operations that had been running in parallel, sometimes intersecting, sometimes completely independent, but always with the same sinister goal to defraud victims, manipulate outcomes, and rake in tens of millions of dollars through illegal means. The first operation, dubbed Operation Nothing But Bet, was laser focused on insider sports betting within the NBA. This was a scheme where players and coaches allegedly leaked super confidential information about player availability, injuries, and even game plans to betting rings, who would then place massive wagers on prop bets with essentially guaranteed outcome. The second operation, called Operation Royal Flush, was somehow even more elaborate and chilling in its execution. This was a nationwide network of totally rigged poker games, backed by 4 major mafia families, the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families, all working together in what prosecutors described as one of the most sophisticated gambling frauds ever uncovered in the United States. Just unbelievable.
Good morning. Today we are here in New York to announce a historic arrest across a wide sweeping criminal enterprise that envelops both the NBA and La Casa Nostra. The men and women up here standing with me represent a small portion of the leadership team that brought profound justice in an era that needed it more than any.
The sheer numbers alone from this scandal were absolutely staggering. Over 30 individuals arrested across 11 states with charges ranging from wire fraud to money laundering, from extortion to even armed robbery. And at the very center of it all, names that every single basketball fan knew. Names that were once synonymous with excellence, championship pedigree, and the kind of success young players could only dream of achieving. Chauncey Billups, Mr. Big Shot himself, a 5-time NBA All-Star, the 2004 NBA Finals MVP, who led the Detroit Pistons to a championship, a member of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, inducted just a year prior in 2024, and as of that fateful October morning, the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, a position he'd held with apparent respect and admiration since 2021. How in the world could someone with such an illustrious career, someone who had achieved absolutely everything basketball had to offer, find themselves handcuffed and facing federal charges that could mean decades behind bars? Then there's Terry Rozier. At just 31 years old, he was in the prime of his career. The Miami Heat guard was playing on a massive $96.3 million 4-year contract and had solidified himself as a legitimate scoring threat in the league. He had everything to lose. And yet, federal prosecutors allege he threw it all away for what amounted to pocket change compared to his annual salary. The allegations are incredibly specific and damning. Rozier allegedly provided insider information about his own performance, specifically texting associates that he would exit games early with fake injuries, also that bettors could cash in on under-prop bets on his statistics. The most glaring example, which later went viral across social media, was a March 23, 2023 game between the Charlotte Hornets and the New Orleans Pelicans. On that night, Rozier allegedly sent a text to his childhood friend Daniro Laster telling him he planned to leave the game early, citing a shoulder injury. True to his word, Rozier played just 9 minutes and 34 seconds before exiting the game. The betting syndicate, armed with this insider knowledge, placed over $200,000 in wagers on under bets for Rozier's points, rebounds, and assists. When Rozier left the court, those bets hit and the group collected massive payout. According to court documents, the proceeds were even delivered to Rozier's own home, where the group literally counted out the cash. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn and where those wild rumors and speculation swirling across social media platforms need to be addressed head-on. In the days following the arrests, social media absolutely exploded with claims about new footage, the supposedly showing NBA players begging Chauncey Billups not to leak their names in connection with the gambling scandal. These claims spread like wildfire, with fans sharing posts, creating memes, and wildly speculating about which players might be involved, which teams could be implicated, and whether the entire league was somehow compromised. Let me be absolutely clear about this. After exhaustive research across news sources, federal indictments, court filings, and every social media platform imaginable, there is no credible evidence whatsoever of any such footage existing. No video has been released. No audio recordings have been made public. No players have been shown begging anyone for anything. This appears to be a classic case of internet speculation run amok, fueled by the shocking nature of the arrests and the natural human tendency to fill in gaps with dramatic narrative. What is real, however, and what has been documented in painstaking detail by federal investigators, is far more disturbing than any sensationalized rumor could be. The investigation revealed that this wasn't just about a few bad actors making poor decisions. No, this was about a systematically organized criminal enterprise that had been operating for years, actively recruiting influential figures from the NBA to serve as what prosecutors called face cards, celebrities whose names and reputations would lure wealthy victims into high-stakes poker games that were rigged from the very beginning. And that's not even the full picture.
The FBI led a coordinated takedown across 11 states to arrest over 30 individuals today responsible for this case, which is very much ongoing. Not only did we crack into the fraud that these perpetrators committed on the grand stage of the NBA, but we also entered and executed a system of justice against La Casa Nostra to include the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families.
According to the indictments, unsealed on October 23rd, the poker scheme alone defrauded victims of at least $7.115 million. But get this, the true figure is likely much higher, as investigations are still ongoing and more victims are coming forward. One individual, believe it or not, reportedly lost a staggering $1.8 million in these rigged games. And these weren't shady backroom card games in some smoky basement. No, these were high-stakes operations taking place in some of the mostest locations across America. We're talking the Hamptons in New York, luxury suites in Las Vegas, upscale venues in Miami, and penthouses in Manhattan. The victims genuinely believed they were sitting down at legitimate poker tables with NBA legends and current players. They thought they were participating in competitive games where skill and luck would decide the winners. What they absolutely didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that every single person at that table, except them, was in on the scam. The dealer was part of it, the other players were part of it, even the so-called face cards, those famous athletes whose presence gave the games an air of legitimacy, were allegedly part of the conspiracy. Billups, according to federal prosecutors, participated in at least one game back in 2019 that defrauded victims out of $50,000, with the proceeds split among the cheaters, dealers, and organizers. But his alleged role, it seems, went beyond just showing up to lend credibility. Court documents actually suggest he may have also been involved in the NBA betting scheme as co-conspirator, described as an Oregon resident, a former player who played from 1997 to 2014, and a coach since 2021, all details that perfectly match Billups. If these allegations are true, he may have tipped off bettors that the Trailblazers would rest star players before a crucial game against the Chicago Bulls on March 24, 2023, which resulted in a crushing 28-point blowout loss and, predictably, successful bets for the syndicate. So, following the money and, well, the mob, when federal prosecutors started peeling back the layers of this criminal enterprise, what they uncovered was an incredibly sophisticated operation that had been years in the making. We're talking a carefully constructed network that combined cutting-edge technology, old-school organized crime enforcement tactics, and the glittering allure of celebrity to create what can only be described as the perfect storm of fraud. This poker scheme, which prosecutors say began operating as early as 2019, demanded an intricate web of participants, each playing a specific role to ensure that wealthy victims, whom the syndicate chillingly referred to as fish, would be systematically stripped of their money without ever realizing they were swimming in a tank full of sharks. These weren't just street-level hustlers running three-card money on a corner. These were organized criminals with access to technology most people didn't even know existed, backed by some of the most powerful and feared crime families in American history. And here's the game changer.
And the fraud is mind-boggling. It's not hundreds of dollars. It's not thousands of dollars. It's not tens of thousands of dollars. It's not even millions of dollars. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars in fraud and theft and robbery across a multi-year investigation.
So how do you even go about certain things like this? The reaction from current and former NBA players has been this wild mix of shock, profound disappointment, and pure anger. On TNT's Inside the NBA show, the legendary panel featuring Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith absolutely tore into the scandal, discussing it in incredible depth. Shaq's comments in particular were incredibly powerful and emotional. He openly admitted to the immense temptation that gambling can present, saying he had been in situations where he could have made similar mistakes, but he passionately emphasized that every single player knows the rules and they absolutely know the consequences.
The games in the New York area were backed by the Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese crime families of La Casa Nostra.
Now, Charles Barkley, as you'd expect, was way more blunt in his assessment. He flat out called the defendants stupid for risking absolutely everything they had for what amounted to relatively small sums of money compared to their massive salaries. His point truly resonated with so many fans and observers because it begs the question, why would someone pulling in $26 million a year, like Rozier, risk all of that just to help a friend make $50,000 or $100,000 on prop bets? And why on earth would a Hall of Fame coach with a secure position and an entire legacy to protect ever get involved with mafia-backed poker scams? It just doesn't make sense, right?
I know everybody that's at play, And I don't like to sit up here and be hypocritical.
Kenny Smith, however, offered a more nuanced perspective, suggesting that a deep-seated gambling addiction could actually explain some of this seemingly irrational behavior. He wisely noted that addiction compels people to make illogical decisions, completely irrespective of their financial status. He even brought up how the FBI director mentioned a victim who lost $1.8 million in those rigged poker games. Proof that even someone with substantial wealth can still get trapped in the addiction cycle. This intense debate between Barkley and Smith really highlights a critical question that this entire scandal forces us to ask. Is this primarily about greed, stupidity, addiction, or is there something else entirely at play? The truth, most likely, is that different participants had different motivations. Some may have genuinely been struggling with gambling addictions. Others might have been driven purely by greed, seeing an easy opportunity to make quick money, and still others, especially those with direct organized crime connections, were probably operating from a place of calculated criminal enterprise, viewing these NBA figures as nothing more than useful tools to be exploited. The broader implications for the NBA and professional sports as a whole genuinely cannot be overstated. This scandal explodes at a time when sports gambling has absolutely skyrocketed across America. Ever since the 2018 Supreme Court decision struck down PASPA, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, that decision effectively opened the floodgates for legalized sports betting in dozens of states. The NBA, along with other major sports leagues, eagerly embraced this shift, signing massive partnership deals with giants like DraftKings, FanDuel, and BetMGM. These partnerships have been incredibly lucrative for the league, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue through advertising, sponsorships, and data licensing agreements. But here's the downside. They've also inadvertently created an environment where the line between legitimate fandom and pure gambling interest has become increasingly blurred. Broadcasts now regularly feature betting odds, prop bet suggestions, and real-time updates on how games are affecting betting lines. Apps let fans place bets from their phones in mere seconds, making gambling as easy as checking a score. Critics have been arguing that the NBA and other leagues have essentially invited this kind of scandal by so thoroughly integrating gambling into the fan experience without nearly adequate safeguard. Commissioner Adam Silver has of course defended the league's approach, pointing out that the NBA did work to implement monitoring systems and education programs specifically designed to prevent this exact kind of manipulation. But clearly, those measures weren't nearly enough to stop a multi-year conspiracy involving players, coaches, organized crime, and sophisticated technology. So, looking ahead, the NBA faces some incredibly difficult decisions about how to proceed. Enhanced injury reporting protocols are almost certainly coming, requiring teams to disclose player availability earlier and with far more detail, aiming to shrink that window where insider information provides an unfair advantage. Stricter limits on prop betting, especially for two-way players or those with minimal minutes, are already being implemented following the Jontay Porter case. Some experts have even called for federal legislation to standardize sports betting regulations across states and provide clearer guidelines for what constitutes illegal manipulation versus legitimate wagering. And let me tell you, this investigation is far from over. Federal prosecutors have made it absolutely clear that more indictments could be coming, with ongoing probes into potential college basketball connections and other professional sports figures who may have been involved in similar schemes. The FBI has publicly encouraged anyone with information about illegal gambling or game manipulation to come forward, strongly suggesting they believe there are still many stones left unturned. So that brings us to the end of this story for now. If you want more interesting videos like this, just hit those cards on your screen.
We all know the rules. We all know the letter of the law. And it's just unfortunate.
This whole fraudulent betting scheme, which operated from December 2022 to March 2024, involved placing completely rigged wagers on at least 7 NBA games, somehow generating tens of millions of dollars in bets and pure profit. Let me throw some specific examples at you to really make you understand just how absolutely insidious this whole thing was. The federal indictment claims Terry Rozier, playing for the Charlotte Hornets at the time, allegedly shared insider information on 7 different NBA games between 2023 and 2023. But here's where it gets truly wild. On March 20, 2023, during a Hornets-Pelicans game, Rozier supposedly faked an early exit, playing only 9 minutes after tipping off his co-conspirators. This allowed them to place massive bets on the under for Rozier's stats, points, rebounds, assists, knowing for a fact he wouldn't hit those numbers numbers because he was barely going to play. The payoff, co-conspirators raked in over $200,000 in bets, with Rozier getting his own cut. And Rozier wasn't even the only one involved. Damon Jones, a former NBA player working as an unofficial assistant coach with the Lakers in 2023, allegedly leaked info about LeBron James sitting out a February 2023 Lakers-Bucks game due to injury. Now, to be super clear, LeBron James himself isn't accused of any wrongdoing here. He had a legitimate injury, but Jones supposedly took that confidential information that wasn't public yet, and shared it with his co-conspirators, giving them a monumental advantage in the betting market. They could bet on the game knowing one of the world's best players wouldn't be on the court, while the general public was still completely in the dark. Chauncey Billups, the current head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers and a basketball Hall of Famer, is also accused of leaking information about Blazers players missing a March 2023 game against the Chicago Bulls. Again, this gave his co-conspirators a critical edge they could exploit in the betting markets. But wait, the poker scheme and the betting scheme weren't just two separate operations. Oh no, 3 defendants, Damon Jones, Eric Ernest, and Shane Hennon, were actually charged in both schemes using the rigged poker games to launder the money they made from the betting fraud. So what you had was this incredibly interconnected web of criminal activity, with the same individuals jumping between different schemes, all designed to squeeze out as much illicit money as humanly possible by exploiting both wealthy poker players and legal sports. The sheer scope of this investigation is just jaw-dropping. When the FBI held their press conference on October 23, 2025 to announce these indictments, FBI Director Kash Patel basically called it the insider trading saga for the NBA, specifically pointing out the massive scale and the direct ties to La Cosa Nostra. But here's where it gets really complicated, and why a lot of people are seriously questioning the NBA's entire relationship with gambling. Look, ever since the Supreme Court overturned PASPA in 2018, opening the door for states to legalize sports betting, the NBA has gone all in on gambling partnerships. We're talking massive deals with MGM Resorts, DraftKings, FanDuel, and countless other betting platforms. Seriously, you cannot watch an NBA game these days without being bombarded with sportsbook ads, hearing announcers talk about betting lines and odds, or seeing live betting odds flashed right there on your screen. The league has completely embraced gambling as a revenue stream. And get this, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver was actually one of the early advocates for legalized sports betting. Back in 2014, long before PASPA was overturned, Silver even wrote an op-ed in the New York Times pushing for federal legalization with proper regulation. His argument was, essentially, that sports betting was happening illegally anyway, so it would be better to bring it into the light, regulate it, and use data from legal betting to monitor for suspicious activity and protect the integrity of the game. And honestly, in theory, that makes a lot of sense, right? But now, with this monumental scandal blowing up, with NBA figures smack dab in the middle of fraud schemes that literally exploited legal betting markets, a lot of people are asking, did the NBA just open Pandora? Did the league's aggressive embrace of gambling actually create an environment where this kind of corruption was far more likely to happen? Because this isn't just about a few bad apples breaking the rules, this strikes at the absolute heart of what makes sports meaningful. If fans can't trust that the games are being played fairly, if they can't trust that the outcomes are legitimate, then what's the whole darn point? So let's dig even deeper into exactly how these schemes operated, because once you grasp the actual mechanics of what was going on, the planning, the flawless execution, the mind-bending technology involved, it becomes even more unbelievable. We're talking inside the mob's playbook here, and let's start with Operation Royal Flush, the totally rigged poker operation, because this is the part of the story that genuinely feels like a Hollywood movie script. Remember what the HSI special agent said at the press conference, that with the alleged involvement of 3 La Cosa Nostra crime families, a Hall of Famer NBA head coach, and former NBA players, the years of investigative work felt reminiscent of a Hollywood movie. And he was absolutely right. These poker games were set up in some of the most exclusive, glamorous places you can possibly imagine. Picture high-rise apartments in Manhattan, penthouses in Miami, ultra-luxury hotel suites in Las Vegas, and sprawling estates in the Hamptons. The organizers would rent out these spaces specifically for these games, creating an undeniable atmosphere of exclusivity and pure luxury. The entire goal was to make the victims feel like they were part of something incredibly special, something truly elite, and this is precisely where the NBA figures entered the picture. Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones allegedly acted as what the indictment calls face cards. What does that even mean? Basically, they were the They were there to lure in super wealthy marks, guys with money to burn who were completely starstruck by the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to play poker with famous athletes. Now let me walk you through some of the insane cheating methods they used, because the level of sophistication here is genuinely impressive from a technical perspective, even if it's utterly morally reprehensible. First off, they had card shuffling machines that were rigged with X-ray technology. Second, they used marked cards that were only visible to people wearing special contact lenses or glasses. To the naked eye, these cards looked completely normal. You could hold them up to the light, examine them closely, and you wouldn't see a thing. But if you were wearing those special lenses, you could literally see invisible markings on the back of every card, telling you exactly what it was. So while you're sitting there trying to read your opponent's tells, they already know exactly what cards you're holding. Third, they had hidden cameras strategically positioned all around the room, often disguised in things like smoke detectors or decorative objects. These cameras would capture the cards as they were dealt, and this footage was then fed to accomplices who would relay the information to the cheaters at the table, probably through hidden earpieces or coded signal. And fourth, they employed classic techniques like having dealers who were totally in on the scam. These dealers could manipulate the deal, making sure the house players got all the good cards while the unsuspecting victims got mediocre ones.
The reason I'm mad at Kenny is, man, this ain't got nothing to do with damn gambling addiction. This ain't got nothing to do with addiction. These dudes are stupid. Why are they stupid? Under no circumstances can you fix basketball games. Under no circumstances.
With all these methods working together, the victims literally had no chance. The games were unwinnable. And when you combine that with the psychological manipulation, the thrill of playing with famous athletes, the alcohol flowing freely, and that high-energy atmosphere, it created a perfect storm where people would lose colossal amounts of money before they even realized what was hitting them. And get this, former NBA referee Tim Donaghy, who was himself convicted in 2007 for betting on games and sharing inside information, has now been speaking out about this scandal and his perspective. It's absolutely chilling. Okay, so the involvement of 4 different La Cosa Nostra families working together. We're talking the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese families. That is extraordinarily rare and speaks volumes about the massive profits at stake. Traditionally, these families stick to their own territories and their own rackets, sometimes even clashing over turf. So for all 4 to collaborate on a single operation, that suggests the money pouring through these poker games was so substantial it made perfect sense to pool resources, share technology, and split the proceeds rather than risk internal warfare. Federal authorities actually revealed that at least 13 defendants in the poker case have direct ties to these organized crime families, including capos, captains, and soldiers. I mean, made members of the mafia who have taken blood oaths of loyalty. These weren't just associates or hangers-on. These were actual members of La Cosa Nostra, the Italian-American mafia, directly involved in running rigged poker games and shamelessly using NBA players and coaches as bait. The role that Chauncey Billups allegedly played as a face card was absolutely critical to the operation's success. Think about it from the perspective of a super wealthy businessman, a hotshot tech entrepreneur, or a hedge fund manager who's got money to burn and just loves the idea of sitting across a poker table from an NBA Hall of Famer. When you get that exclusive invitation to a private high-stakes game where Chauncey Billups is going to be playing, your guard naturally drops. You think to yourself, this has to be legitimate. Why would a Hall of Fame coach risk his reputation on some shady operation? Boom. That's exactly what the organizers were counting on. Billups wasn't the only NBA figure allegedly recruited for this purpose, either. Damon DJ Jones, a former NBA player and assistant coach with stints at teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers and Miami Heat, was also arrested and charged in both the poker scheme and the sports betting case. Jones allegedly served as a crucial bridge between the two operations, using his connections in the league to gather inside information about player injuries and game plans, while also showing up at the poker games to lend that critical air of credibility. And I cannot overstate the sheer sophistication of the cheating technology they employed. Let me break down exactly how this worked, because it's genuinely mind-blowing. Federal agents seized custom-modified shuffling machines, specifically Deckmate 2 units, that had been purchased off the shelf and then taken to tech specialists who installed hidden cameras and wireless transmitters inside them. When cards were shuffled and dealt, these modified machines would literally read the order of the entire deck using RFID chips or barcode scanning technology. This information was then transmitted in real time to someone sitting off-site, sometimes in a different room, sometimes in a completely different building, who could see exactly which cards each player at the table had been dealt. This person, often called the quarterback of the operation, would then communicate this information back to conspirators at the table using encrypted cell phones, earpieces, or coded signals. But the technology went even further. Ray tables were installed in some locations, allowing conspirators wearing special glasses or using hidden cameras to literally see through the cards lying face down on the table. Imagine being a victim in this game, holding what you think is a winning hand, completely unaware that everyone else at the table can see your cards as clearly as if they were face up. Marked decks were used in conjunction with special contact lenses that made invisible markings visible to the wearers. Poker chip trays were even fitted with hidden cameras that would capture images of cards as they were dealt or discarded. Every single angle was covered, every possible edge was exploited. There was virtually no scenario in which a fish could win, and if by some miracle they did start to get lucky, the game would simply be stopped, or the victim would be subtly encouraged to play just one more hand until the conspirators could recoup their temporary losses. And what happened when victims couldn't pay their debt? This is where the mafia connection became particularly dark and truly dangerous. The organized crime families didn't just provide backing and legitimacy to the operation, they also provided enforcement. When someone owed money and couldn't pay, they were subjected to the kind of intense pressure tactics the mafia has perfected over decades. Threats, intimidation, violence, and in at least one case documented in the indictments, armed robbery. Federal prosecutors revealed that one victim who dared to refuse payment was tracked down, and conspirators used explicit threats of violence to collect the debt. In another instance, someone was robbed at gunpoint specifically to obtain a rigged shuffling machine that the conspirators needed back to avoid it being discovered and potentially examined by authorities. This wasn't some friendly white-collar crime where everyone shakes hands and moves on. No, this was organized crime in its rawest, most brutal form, where debts were enforced through pure fear and violence. Now let's pivot our attention to the sports betting side of the operation, because this is where the implications for the NBA become even more troubling. This betting scheme, which federal prosecutors say ran from December 2022 through March 2024, involved the blatant manipulation of at least 7 NBA games through the use of insider information about player availability, injuries, and game strategies that hadn't yet been made public. The business model was actually quite simple, even if the execution was incredibly elaborate. Find someone with inside access to NBA teams, a player, a coach, a trainer, anyone in the organization who knows what's really happening before the public does, and then convince them to share that confidential information with bettors who could then place massive wagers with essentially guaranteed outcome. Terry Rozier's alleged involvement provides the clearest, most chilling example of how this worked. On March 23, 2023, while he was still playing for the Charlotte Hornets, Rozier allegedly sent a text message to his childhood friend Danilo Laster, informing him that he planned to leave the game early, citing a shoulder injury. Now, this wasn't some legitimate injury Rozier sustained during the game. According to prosecutors, this was a pre-planned exit designed specifically to enable betting in the game. Armed with this insider knowledge, Laster and others in the betting syndicate placed over $1,000 wagers on under prop bets for Rozier's statistics, betting that he would score fewer than a certain number of points, grab fewer than a certain number of assists. When Rozier left the game after just 9 minutes and 34 seconds of playing time, having scored only a handful of points, all of those under bets hit, generating tens of thousands of dollars in pure profit for the conspirator. The video footage of Rozier's exit from that game has now gone absolutely viral on social media, with millions of views as people dissect his body language, the timing of his departure, and whether there were any visible signs that he was faking an injury. Sports commentators and fans alike have pored over every second of that footage, looking for clues, trying to determine if Rozier appeared genuinely genuinely hurt or if his exit was as scripted as prosecutors allege. What makes this particularly damning is that the NBA had actually investigated Rozier for this exact incident back in 2023 after sportsbooks like DraftKings flagged unusual betting patterns around his performance. At the time, the league concluded they didn't have enough evidence to take action against Rozier, and he was effectively cleared. However, federal investigators, with their access to subpoena power, wiretaps, text messages, and financial records, were able to build a much more comprehensive case than the NBA could with its internal investigation. But Rozier's alleged scheme wasn't an isolated incident, not by a long shot. The indictments detail multiple games where insider information was allegedly used to manipulate betting outcomes. Damon Jones, that former player and assistant coach, allegedly sold information about LeBron James's unreported foot injury before a Lakers-Bucks game on February 9th. He also allegedly leaked information about Lakers player availability before a game against the Oklahoma City Thunder on January 5th. An unnamed Orlando Magic player allegedly leaked information about the Cleveland Cavaliers before a game in April 2023, allowing bettors to successfully wager on the spread after both teams rested their starters. And then there's the allegation against co-conspirator 8, who many believe to be Chauncey Billups based on the detailed description in the indictment. This individual allegedly tipped off bettors that the Portland Trail Blazers planned to rest their star players Damian Lillard, Jusuf Nurkic, Jerami Grant, and Anthony Simons before their game against the Chicago Bulls on March. The Trail Blazers were subsequently blown out by 28 points in that game, and bettors who had been given advance notice were able to cash in on spread bets and under totals, knowing that Portland's best players would be sitting on the bench.